need to know that. Sorry to interrupt you, Susan.
That's okay. No problem. So this is the Michigan ADA celebration, and the workshops are every day, mostly at 2 o'clock, but on Thursday nights we also have them at 7 o'clock, and on Saturdays we have them from 7 to 9, and everybody is welcome, and most of them don't really have anything to do with Michigan. It's just called that because those of us that volunteered to work on this and make it happen are mostly, but not only, from Michigan. That's just where it started. And then people from all over the country sort of joined in and helped out. This is a grassroots effort. There's no big corporations behind it throwing a bunch of money at us to do this. So we're flying by the seat of our pants. So, you know, there will be technical difficulties periodically. That's just going to be hopefully part of the charm. I hope it's charm. We've had, so far, this is now our 5th one, and I'm really excited about this one because ADAPT and Not Dead Yet have long been a part of my life. Not Dead Yet was the very first political action that I was in with my son that related to disability, and he became immortalized by Tom Olin, who took pictures of him. So Not Dead Yet is always going to be very, very close to my heart. There are right now 3 people that are online that are incredibly important to Not Dead Yet and incredibly important to you, because they are making sure by their actions that our lives are valuable and are going to be respected better than they have been in the past, and hopefully will be continuing to be respected more. But they will go into much greater detail about that. So one of the first people who's going to be speaking is Diane Coleman, who I have known, I guess now for over 30 years. She is an incredible advocate. She is knowledgeable about every aspect of what is happening in this world that is impeding the ability of people with disabilities to have the freedom to live the way they want to and not have their lives taken away prematurely. She started Not Dead Yet, was one of the co-founders with Not, I think it's co-founder, not sure. Were you a co-founder or did you start it by yourself?
I founded it, yes.
Yes. And the organization has grown. I remember when nobody had ever heard of it and there weren't that many of us, and it just has blossomed in every direction. And that is all due to Diane. And then Anita Cameron will be next, who works on minority outreach for Not Dead Yet. And she has a long history with ADAPT. She started in ADAPT in 1986, which is probably about the time that I started too. Be honest though, I don't remember her from way back when. I remember further on. She's also CERT certified, and if you don't know what that is people who are trained to respond to emergencies, any kind of emergency that includes people, not just people with disabilities, but in the most effective manner. And but her being a part of that has made the CERT training much better in terms of including the kinds of things that people who are trained need to understand about what people with disabilities need in an emergency. And then John Kelly will be speaking. And John Kelly, he's on the East Coast and has a group in Boston. It's Boston, I think. Well, it's in Massachusetts, called Second Thoughts. And part of that stems from the idea that there are people who consider suicide or consider assisted suicide. And if there's too many people around that are sort of supportive of that idea that life with disability is way too difficult, and sure, suicide's a good idea, then maybe you won't have second thoughts. So John is out there to make sure that people who are having difficulty dealing with the challenges of a new disability or a progressively worse disability will be encouraged to have second thoughts and decide to live. And what other notes have I got here? So, well, but these three people really are you may not realize how important they are to you, but they really are important to your lives because they make sure that the people who are making decisions that would put our lives at risk, they're there at congressional hearings demanding that the people with disabilities' lives are respected and not taken for granted. Diane, you ready?
Sure, Susan. That's quite a buildup, and I wish we really did have that level of power, but I'm really glad to share the information about the struggle. So thank you for inviting us. I want to do a little prehistory of Not Dead Yet. My first involvement as a disability activist in the issues that became NDY's focus, I'll just say NDY instead of Not Dead Yet, focused concerned the case of Elizabeth Bouvet. In 1985, I was an attorney in LA and volunteered as a member of the board of a Center for Independent Living. And the center's executive director contacted me about the case, explaining that Elizabeth Bouvet was a 26-year-old woman with cerebral palsy who had been through a miscarriage, a marriage breakup, and other setbacks in her personal life, including the state rehabilitation agency taking back her accessible van and blocking her plans to attend a master's degree program. So she'd gone to a local hospital asking to be allowed to starve herself to death while receiving comfort care and pain medications. The hospital refused to go along, but they admitted her. Then she got a Hemlock Society lawyer to take her so-called right to die case. I was asked to join in a disability rights picketing protest about the case. Miscarriage, marriage breakup. If Ms. Bouvet had been non-disabled, she would have gotten suicide prevention help to get through those setbacks. The discrimination was obvious to disability activists, but not to the media or the general public. Fortunately, her so-called right to die by refusing food and water was new legal territory back then, so it took a couple years to get through the courts. The California Appellate Court ultimately compared her not to a suicidal person needing suicide prevention, but to a terminally ill person in a helpless, hopeless condition, granting her the right to starve herself to death with the hospital's cooperation, giving her morphine and comfort care. But by then, she didn't do it. Also in the 1980s, there were several cases that went through the courts involving young men with quadriplegia on ventilators. These men were stuck in nursing facilities against their will or feared winding up in an institution when their parents died. Some of them very clearly said that they wanted to get out of the nursing home or else pull the plug. In case after case, the courts said that the usual state interest in preserving life and preventing suicide did not apply to these men, while saying nothing about them being stuck in nursing facilities against their will. In each case, the court found that their liberty rights included the liberty to die, but apparently not liberty from institutions. In only one case, that of Larry McAfee, were ADAPT disability advocates in Georgia and people at the Shepherd Spinal Center able to intervene and help him move out into the community. We call these the give me liberty or give me death cases. Disability activists spoke up for their rights in court briefs, conferences, and media, talking about how these men were devalued and mistreated. While we don't oppose the right to refuse treatment, based on informed consent. We object that their only choices were an institution or death. Disability groups object to the implicit claim that any of us need to die to have dignity. Needing help in dressing, bathing, and other intimate daily tasks does not rob us of dignity. Unfortunately, popular culture has done virtually nothing to educate the public about how people with severe disabilities actually live good lives. Instead, our lives are portrayed as tragedies or sensationalized as heroism, but how to live with disabilities is left out of the picture. No wonder people who acquire disabilities so often see death as the only solution. In October 2004, many years later, one of the bioethicists who was active in the Michigan case of David Rivlin, Dr. Howard Brody, wrote a belated apology in the Lansing City Pulse. Quote, "This is a key lesson that disabilities advocates are trying to teach the rest of us. If we look at the case one way, it seems that the problem is the person's physical disability. If we shift our view, we realize that the problem is not the disability, but rather the refusal of society to make reasonable and not terribly expensive accommodations to it. There's every reason to believe in hindsight that David Rivlin died unnecessarily, and that we who claim to care about his rights should have been demanding that services be made available for him rather than that he be allowed to die. As one who argued the wrong thing back then, I apologize for my short-sightedness." All I can say is, kind of too little too late. Then in the 1990s, it also brought us Michigan's Dr. Jack Kevorkian. And many of us who followed the issue closely were horrified to see him embraced by progressive journalists like Mike Wallace of 60 Minutes and Barbara Walters. And while he was constantly described as helping terminally ill people die, the New England Journal of Medicine published a letter from the Michigan coroner and others documenting that 2/3 of Kevorkian's body count was people with disabilities who were not terminal at all. By the mid-90s, we knew that we would need to do more than write articles and court briefs, more than give workshops at conferences and speak to the occasional reporter. It became clear that we would need a group that would focus on this issue and add the tactics of nonviolent direct action to our efforts. So when Bob Kafka, one of National ADAPT's leaders, said, "I've got a name for your group," from the movie Monty Python and the Holy Grail, that day in April 1996, I started Not Dead Yet. The first NDY protest was in Southeast Michigan at Kevorkian's cottage, where ADAPT members also came from several other states. We carried signs and had someone dressed up as a Grim Reaper. Over the next 3 years, we kept coming back, pushing for equal protection of the law for disabled people, pushing for prosecution of Kevorkian, whom we viewed as a serial killer of disabled people. And finally, there was a trial. One of our members put together photos and stories of each known victim, and we made laminated posters so they wouldn't smudge if it rained on our protest outside the court. We tied them together like a quilt and laid them out in the courtyard. We also had signs that said, "Jail Jack." And at first, some people were surprised that we weren't in favor of him. By the end of our efforts regarding Kevorkian, including attending the week-long trial and the sentencing hearing, he was in prison. Not Dead Yet has worked on other issues too all along. We've advocated against laws and policies that allow doctors and surrogate healthcare decision makers to take away life-sustaining treatment against our will. One target of our protest was Princeton University, when they hired Professor Peter Singer in 1999 to head up their bioethics department. Singer's known for arguing that an individual is not a legal person unless they satisfy his standards for mental abilities. He also advocates that parents should be allowed to kill their disabled child in the first month of life if they want to. About 200 disability activists and allies protested at Princeton in 1999, including Teddy Fitzmaurice, and 14 were arrested at the administration building, and the New York Times covered what we did. NDY has also been very concerned about futility policies that allow doctors and hospitals to withhold life-sustaining medical treatment that a disabled person or their surrogate want, which is a form of involuntary euthanasia. And now we see COVID-19 healthcare rationing or triage policies that also throw disabled people under the bus. What COVID-19 has shown the disability community is that the healthcare system devalues us. A number of advocacy groups have filed federal complaints with the Office for Civil Rights to challenge these triage policies. Fortunately, OCR complaints in some states have helped us make gains in that fight. The Tennessee complaint resulted in a settlement that does some very good things, the best result so far. It prohibits what they call categorical exclusions based on a specific disability or diagnosis, and prohibits exclusions based on resource intensity, meaning how much care do you need or how long you might need it to recover from COVID. It also prohibits what they call long-term survivability considerations. So it rejects rationing based on your future life expectancy after you recover from COVID-19. It requires reasonable modifications of methods doctors use to predict how likely it is that you will recover from COVID-19. And finally, it prohibits someone's personal ventilator from being given to someone else who is viewed as more likely to survive if you go to the hospital. Personally, that's a very big issue for me. But much more advocacy is needed at the state and local level around the country. Advocates can get copies of your state's or hospital's triage policies. They're also called crisis standards of care, and they apply not only to COVID-19, but in most cases also to any type of like natural disaster, floods, fires, hurricanes. You can file an OCR complaint to try to get a Tennessee style of settlement, or maybe something even better. As far as I know, Michigan has not had an OCR complaint filed yet. You can get your legislators to introduce and sponsor state laws that are consistent with the Tennessee settlement, and those would actually have a lot of force of law that the settlements may or may not. And you can get disability rights advocates on local ethics committees, which often make these life and death decisions. That'll take some negotiating, but I think it's worth pushing for. So finally, Not Dead Yet would like us all to keep 3 principles in mind. Reject the idea that we're better off dead than disabled. Reject the idea that society is better off without us. And when it comes to all the policy making about these issues, nothing about us without us. So now let me turn it over to Anita Cameron, our Director of Minority Outreach. And I should say, we were planning to take questions at the end, if that's okay.
Having a problem?
Any questions in the chat, by the way?
Yeah, no questions yet.
So Anita, can you get on to, you're on mute still.
I'm sorry, I was on
Or no-
mute and
Right
didn't
now we're good.
realize it. So hello, everyone. My name is Anita Cameron. I am Director of Minority Outreach for Not Dead Yet. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And although you can't see it, I'm wearing a pink and black Not Dead Yet t-shirt. So I'm going to talk about a couple of issues related to assisted suicide. I'm going to read it because y'all who know me know I tend to go off and ramble. So, so assisted suicide laws say that they're only for terminal people with 6 months or less to live, but doctors make mistakes. In June 2009, while living in Washington State, my mother was determined to be in the final stages of COPD, which is chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and she was placed in hospice. My mother wanted to go home to Colorado to die, so the arrangements were made. And a funny thing happened, though. Once she got there, her health began to improve, and over 11 years later, she's still alive. She lives in her own home in the community, and she's reasonably active. My mother's case showed me that doctors could be wrong. And it frightened me to think that at any time when she was in Washington State, she could have asked for the suicide drugs and she would have gotten them because she was deemed to be terminal when in fact she wasn't. She was living in Washington State at the time that their assisted suicide law went into effect. So let me talk about Michael Hickson for a little bit, because Michael Hickson's case is a clear case of discrimination against disabled people. Michael Hickson was a 46-year-old Black man from Texas. He's the father of 5 children. And Mr. Hickson was a quadriplegic, the result of a brain injury, which was caused by a heart attack. He was placed in a nursing home where he contracted COVID-19. However, due to his disability, the doctor decided not to treat him, stating that he had no quality of life. But family videos show him laughing and singing with his wife and children. So he was placed in hospice and allowed to die. So COVID-19 has laid bare racial disparities and disability discrimination in healthcare that leads to medical rationing and futility decisions. And most COVID-19 deaths in the Black community have been traced to pre-existing conditions like diabetes and cancer, and heart conditions, which are known to be examples of where Blacks receive inferior treatment compared to whites. Blacks are more likely to die from heart attack or cardiac disease, yet we receive inferior care compared to whites. And because of the stereotype that Blacks are closer to animals and have thicker skin and therefore feel less pain than whites, that's led to Black patients receiving abysmal treatment for pain. Our pain isn't taken seriously. We're accused of being hysterical, emotional, or outright drug seeking. In fact, in a study conducted in 2016, it was found that a third of 222 white medical students and residents surveyed held that belief that Black people have thicker skin and we're closer to animals and therefore we don't, feel pain the same way. So, and those respondents that study found were also less likely to perceive the intensity of Black patients' pain and recommend appropriate treatment. So in a recent national study of more than 1 million children in emergency rooms suffering from appendicitis, it was found that Black children were only 1/5 as likely to receive opioid painkillers for their severe pain as white children. So, you know, white kids are given opioids and black kids are given Tylenol. So we die from diabetes at twice the rate of whites. We're the sickest patients waiting for organ transplants, yet often die waiting. Blacks are diagnosed with cancer at much later stages, and our prognosis is worse. And due to the stereotype of black patients' non-compliance with doctors' instructions and orders, in other words, they say we don't do what we're supposed to do, we're not afforded the state-of-the-art medical care that white patients routinely get, especially when they have the money. So what does this have to do with doctor-assisted suicide? Everything. If you're not getting effective pain treatment for a terminal illness and you live in a state where assisted suicide is legal, you'll be more likely to seek that recourse. If you are poor and you live in such a state, your doctor can convince you to choose assisted suicide, so you won't be a financial burden on your family. And this is all, COVID-19 has laid bare all of this. And Michael Hickson's case has laid bare the racial and disparities and disability discrimination in healthcare. But you know, the ADA is turning 30, you know, and disabled activists, you know, we're using it to save lives and end discrimination in healthcare, you know, as evidenced, you know, by the increasing awareness of and complaints going out, you know, to the states and in that nature. You know, we're using it, you know, to save lives. And so I am going to turn it over to John Kelly.
Hi, everyone. My name is John Kelly. I am Not Dead Yet's New England Regional Director. My pronouns are he, him, and his. Thank you again, Susan, for inviting us. I'm wearing my Not Dead Yet t-shirt and Not Dead Yet pin. My personal story starts with a 1984 spinal cord injury that left me what people call paralyzed from the neck down. Many people, especially more powerful people, associate this phrase with a living death, a humiliating burden calling out for death. After my injury, people would tell me to my face that they would rather be dead than like me. My own father wished I had died in my accident. Popular culture romanticizes the death of people like me, from films like Whose Life Is It Anyway, to $1 Million Baby, to The Sea Inside, and 2016's hit Me Before You. People like me must die. Me Before You was based on a book by the same title by Jojo Moyes. From her observations of a couple of disabled family members, Moyes concluded that, quote, "At what point does the quality become meaningless? At what point do you give someone the right to decide for themselves?" So she wrote the book with, quote, "quality of life very high in my mind." So Moyes set up everything in the book to have the main character's life to be perfect except for the disability. So despite wealth and a frilly girlfriend, played by Esquire's 2015 sexiest woman alive, Emilia Clarke, you know, Daenerys Targaryen, the Quad insists on being euthanized in Switzerland because he doesn't want to burden his girlfriend. with hospital appointments and such. Fans and reviewers alike described the movie as heartwarming. We got some good coverage in protesting, and I'm sure people could find those videos. Although in Boston, we had 4 straight protests over the weekends in June without any media coverage. When I was hospitalized 2 years ago with pneumonia, the doctor queried my brothers on that same quality of life, dun 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 dun. Last month, Black quadriplegic Michael Hickson's doctor justified not treating Michael for COVID-19 by saying, quote, his quality of life, he doesn't have much of one. Both the doctor and hospital continue to insist that they acted in Michael's best interests. A video from 2018 shows up this position as an arrogant lie. Viewers see Michael laughing with his wife and 5 children. He sings happy birthday to one of them, and one of his sons gives him a big hug. A news story recounts him giving book recommendations and telling his niece when she turns 21 not to drink too much. COVID-19 exposes that better dead than disabled mindset for all to see, with people falsely dividing society between a non-disabled us and a vulnerable them. The them is us, who can be vilified as weak and who can be denied ventilators and hospital beds in a triage situation. Systemic racism means Black and brown people die disproportionately. Now let's talk about these state-run suicide programs. Neither doctors nor witnesses need know the assisted suicide candidate more than superficially. Witnesses can simply check the person's ID. Doctors who decline to prescribe, for whatever reason, are not interviewed. People can simply shop until they find a prescriber. Shop until you drop. Doctors are not held liable as long as they say they acted in good faith, an impossible standard to disprove. This good faith standard makes all the other quote-unquote safeguards unenforceable. For all other procedures, doctors are liable if they are negligent. Assisted suicide laws are, at bottom, immunity laws for everyone involved in the process. Prominent assisted suicide promoters from the group Compassion and Choices routinely paint suicide as the only alternative to an agonizing, painful death. But at the same time, they will speak like former CNC President Barbara Coombs Lee, who told the Washington Post a couple of years ago about disability scenarios she considered worse than death. Lee described one assisted suicide who considered her emotional distress over incontinence, quote, more painful than any of the pain from the cancer. Michigan's own Janet Good, founder of the Michigan Hemlock Society, famously told the Washington Post, pain is not the main reason we want to die, it's the indignity. It's the inability to get out of bed or get onto the toilet, let alone drive a car or go shopping without another's help. I can speak for literally hundreds of people whose bedside I've sat at over the years. Every client I've talked to say they've had enough when they can't go to the bathroom by themselves. Most of them say, I can't stand my mother, my husband, wiping my butt. That's why everybody in the movement talks about dignity. People have their pride. They want to be in charge. The word dignity derives from the Latin for worthy, the state or quality of being worthy of honor or respect by others. It means a sense of pride in oneself, self-respect. Although it appears as part of the individual, to which society then reacts, dignity, just like its opposites, disgrace and humiliation, can only refer back to a social group.
It's okay.
People,
No big deal.
that's why people say it is a social construction. Dr. Ira Byock, a leading palliative care expert, told the Post, quote, it's a bait and switch. We're actually helping people hasten their deaths because of existential suffering. That's chilling to me. He said that almost all pain is controllable. Now I'm going to go through some of the main reasons Not Dead Yet opposes assisted suicide. First, insurer bottom line. Last year, friends of the disability community, Carrie Ann Lucas and Bill Peace, died after insurer United Health refused to cover slightly more expensive but life-saving treatments. Insurers have denied prescribed treatments but offered to cover assisted suicide, like with Barbara Wagner and Randy Stroop of Oregon. Stephanie Packer from California, who learned that her copay for assisted suicide would be $1.20. Nevada Dr. Brian Callister reported 2 patients denied for routine but expensive treatments by California and Oregon-based insurers who only offered hospice or assisted suicide. Second, abuse. 1 in 10 adults over the age of 60 are abused every year. Many people view nursing homes as where people go to die, and some associate a nursing home as worse than death. My fiercely independent grandmother starved herself to death to escape relentless nursing home abuse. Today, 40% of all COVID-19 deaths come from nursing homes. At home, nothing in the law can stop an heir or abusive caregiver from steering someone to assisted suicide, witnessing the request, picking up the lethal dose, and even administering it. No witnesses are required at the death, so who would know? Assisted suicide programs are set up not to see abuse, as the state's role ends with the dispensing of the drugs, and states' public health authorities have no authority or ability to investigate individual cases. Third, misdiagnosis. Thousands of Americans graduate hospice yearly, and 12 to 15% of people diagnosed with 6 months or fewer to live outlive their prognoses, sometimes by decades. A good example is Jeanette Hall, who wrote the Boston Globe in 2011 that, quote, "I didn't want to suffer. I wanted to do what our law allowed, and I wanted my doctor to help me. Instead, he encouraged me not to give up, and ultimately I decided to fight the disease. I had both chemotherapy and radiation. I am so happy to be alive." It's now 11 years later. It's now 20 years later. And she wrote, "If my doctor had believed in assisted suicide, I would be dead. I thank him and all my doctors for helping me to choose life with dignity." Fourth, the end-of-life concerns reported in Oregon and elsewhere deal not with pain but reactions to disability, distress and shame over dependence on others, lost abilities and dignity, feeling like a burden, and incontinence. And supporters say without any sense of irony that no disabled person has ever been harmed. 2 consultants found Oregonian Kate Cheney to be confused and suspected her daughter of coercing her. Kate finally got her prescription from a Kaiser Permanente ethicist who found her reasons for wanting to die rational. She said that if she could no longer manage her colostomy bag or get out of bed by herself, then she might take the drugs. As it happened, after arriving home from a respite stay in a nursing home to benefit her daughter, she said that she would rather not live in a nursing home after all. She was dead that day. Some choice. That insurer sponsored as a benefit the death of a person with disability concern, and it is only natural that this so-called benefit will be extended to non-terminal people with the same disabling features. And fifth, depression. Governments shouldn't be telling depressed and suicidal people that suicide is a good solution to suffering. At its recent annual suicide prevention meeting, which Anita and I attended, the Massachusetts Department of Public Health had a speaker who championed Jack Kevorkian and assisted suicide. Oregon's law doesn't care about your depression as long as you have approved motives like feeling like a burden. Ruthie Poole, president of the board of Empower, a Massachusetts group of people with lived experience of mental health diagnosis, trauma, and addiction, wrote in the Boston Globe last year that, quote, assisted suicide programs send the message to people in emotional distress, old, young, physically ill or not, that suicide is a reasonable answer to life's problem. It isn't. She continued, my community knows that depression does impair judgment. Absolute hopelessness and seeing no way out are common feelings for those of us who have experienced severe depression. Personally, as someone who has been suicidal in the past, I can relate to the desire for a painless and easy way out. However, depression is treatable and reversible. Suicide ain't. Opposition to assisted suicide is centered in the Black and Latinx and disabled communities, who are rightly suspicious of an often hostile medical establishment getting power to help make you dead. Blacks and Latinos oppose assisted suicide by more than 2 to 1. Every major national disability rights group that has taken a position on the matter has come out against assisted suicide. To conclude, as Diane started, we don't need to die to have dignity. We champion meaning found in mutual aid and interdependence. And we do have demands. When we are depressed, we demand the same access to suicide prevention services as everyone else. When we need assistance, we demand funded home care, not nursing homes. When we need medical care, we get it. When we need an accessible home, our own homes, not nursing homes. When we are ready to work, job opportunities. And we deserve and we demand for year-round the same love and solidarity shown this week. Happy birthday, Michigan ADA. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was very inspiring. All of you were very inspiring, but I'm ready to join a march. Too bad we can't can't do that right now. So have we got some questions? Let me see if we have any questions in the chat. I don't see any. So you want to flag us if you have a question and we'll, or jump in. Well, I'll jump in. So what's on the congressional agenda at the moment that we should be paying attention to?
This is Diane. I could answer that a little bit. You know, we've gone through, ever since the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in 1997 that there's not a federal constitutional right to assisted suicide, it's been a battle in every state individually. And there have been 8 states and the District of Columbia that have passed assisted suicide laws over the last 20 years. But each year in the last several, there are 15 to 20 bills in other states. And we've managed to defeat over that time, or to be part of coalitions that have defeated those bills about 200 times. But it would really be helpful to have at least some guidance from the federal level about this. And so there is a bill in Congress, a bipartisan bill, that's a resolution. It's a advisory resolution in a way. It's not a law that would directly overturn anything that's out there, but it would say, these are the things we're worried about. and it would be better not to pass any more of these laws. And that's concurrent resolution, HR concurrent resolution 79. It was numbered 80 a year ago, and it's been reintroduced. So it's HCon Res 79, and we would encourage everybody to get their legislators to co-sponsor that resolution, especially those on the Democratic side.
So if someone wants to get involved with Not Dead Yet, I know that you've got chapters around the country. How many are there, and how do people get involved?
Well, I would recommend that people subscribe to our blog, because then you'll be aware of what's happening at the time that we cover that way. It's a free subscription. You just go to the blog and send your email address in. Our chapters are pretty loose, I would have to say. And what happens is that we work with ADAPT chapters and Centers for Independent Living and other advocates that we know over, the time that we've been around, when something happens in their state. And we actually rely oftentimes on the people in the state to contact us for information and, to be able to work together that way, spreading the word about what's needed at the local level. But so I would just recommend getting in touch. If you are interested, you can email me or John or Anita. Our email addresses are on our website under notdeadyet.org about/staff. And our phone numbers if you prefer to call.
And this is John. Massachusetts does have an active campaign to pass assisted suicide in the state. And we have a Second Thoughts Massachusetts group that is meeting. We just met Tuesday evening. We'll meet again in 2 weeks. Best way to get involved is to email me. An easy way to remember is Second Thoughts Kelly, and the word second is spelled out, secondthoughtskelly@gmail.com. And we could use people who might be interested in writing letters, who know people who might be allies. We're hoping to get some progressive legislators on our side, and maybe local progressive politicians of color who might support their community's views, especially Latinx and Black legislators.
Laura Frankel here. Does anyone know about legislation here in Michigan that might be pending? And how do we find out what's happening here in Michigan?
We would have to look into that directly. I definitely don't. We don't have the bandwidth to keep on track with every state, so we would have to work together to explore that. And not just on assisted suicide. I don't think you have a bill, but on some of the other topics we deal with.
So is there a way that you can assist us in finding those things out, or telling us how to obtain that information?
Yes.
Okay, could you?
We could do that one-to-one.
Okay.
If you want to exchange emails.
Could you connect with Susan about those things, and then she can connect with the rest of us?
Sure. That'd be great.
That would be wonderful. Thank you.
I have a question, if that's okay.
Of course.
Hi again, my name's Liam. I think when I was listening to this people speak, something came to mind, and one of the things that people were talking about was like suicide prevention in the disabled community. I'm a certified peer specialist and a community health worker. I'm also disabled. And it's something that I think about often because I had a friend who basically chose assisted suicide in 2018. I think it was 2019. He was 25. And he passed away on hospice because of the lack of care that he was receiving for the same disease that I have. And when I think about suicide prevention in our communities and that people's responses that we're such a burden that we should go on hospice because our insurance won't pay for blah, 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 or they won't give us our pain medicine or whatever, it makes me think of, okay, so what can we do as a community to make sure that we're doing mutual aid with each other and having suicide prevention that means something to us? Because, I mean, if you go into a hospital, what are the chances are that you're going to talk to a person as a disabled person that's also disabled? You're going to have an able-bodied therapist telling you how you should do X, Y, Z, right? And that's why I became a peer specialist, because I couldn't anymore sit with disabled people and have them hear, like, well, my therapist, he goes to the gym 5 times a week, and he told me that, you know, maybe that'll help me with my disability, or, you know, and it just increases that societal sense of burden on us if we're talking to people that are able-bodied that don't know our experience. So I guess, like I'm saying, like, how can we bolster our own suicide prevention by making sure that we as a community figure out how to get people what they need, but disabled person to disabled person, because suicide prevention is not going to happen from able-bodied people. They're just not going to understand what we go through.
Or that
Those are all really valid points. Without easy answers, Leah, but I'd be glad to email with you offline. But there is a group called NMD United, Neuromuscular Disabilities United, that might be a good connected place for people with the type of disabilities that you and I both have, and others in the array.
Yeah.
But the issues that are, regardless of type of disability, those issues are all serious.
Yeah, I'll definitely email you. It's just something I think about with my friend. He was 25, and, you know, to think that they allowed him without any suicide intervention to go on hospice, starve himself to death, and pass away, 25 years old. That's not acceptable. And, you know, I can't even believe that that's where we are as a culture, that his life was so worthless to the system. They just said, well, you know, we're not covering your treatment anymore. You're not doing well. You know, you keep getting infections. Like, guess what? Just go on hospice. And that's our response to somebody that's young. And yeah, it doesn't matter what age, but I'm just saying as an example, like, I can't even believe that was a thing. So thank you for being here and doing this, because I definitely, especially seeing it right in front of my face, like, something needs to happen, you know? So thank you guys.
Yeah.
Liam, this is John Kelly. Something that we can aspire to is something like what Connecticut has going, in which Second Thoughts Connecticut, our sister organization, they persuaded the public health department to include disability in in their suicide prevention efforts. In Massachusetts, meanwhile, we can get nothing out of the suicide prevention services. They seem to be run and staffed by the same demographic of people who support assisted suicide.
Yes.
Mainly wealthier, whiter, more educated people, professionals. And, it just, yeah, definitely quote signs. Thank you. And, to get people involved, unfortunately it can be hard because we're often not people's first issue.
We're not the target demographic, right? We're not the,
Right. I mean, it's really part of the class war. It's being pushed by, the same people who populate and run the media, the institutions, medicine, they're all aligned against us. And, you know, in 2012, when Massachusetts won at the ballot, it was Black and Latinx people voting in such numbers that the bill went down.
This, Anita, I, I have been trying to put out the word, especially to Black and Latinx folks, simply because it's not something, and I've written on this, suicide is not something we Black folks do. I'm not saying it doesn't occur in our communities, but overall, it's not something that we do, and we have a, and we certainly, you know, overwhelmingly against assisted suicide. Organizations like Compassionate Choices, however, have been making inroads into, you know, the Black community in particular, and the Latino community, in order to trick us, into believing that assisted suicide is a good thing for our community. And so one of the things I know John and I have been working together to reach out to Black folks in Massachusetts and around the country, you know, because I've done, you know, a bit of research, and while most of the states that have passed assisted suicide laws are predominantly white, it's a little scary when you get California involved. You know, California has passed, and California is a fairly diverse state. The District of Columbia has passed, and the District of Columbia is actually a majority Black city. I'm seeing, you know, that there have been incremental increases in the numbers of Blacks and Latinos asking for assisted suicide in California and Colorado. Not so in Washington, D.C. yet, but, you know, I'm looking at, you know, I tend to be a little forward looking in these because things may not happen now. That's just not the nature of things. But looking forward, as this gets more normalized around our country, you know, it's a scary thought. It's
To add to some of that.
Wait, hold 1 second. Can I just interrupt for 1 second?
Yes,
Let
go ahead.
the interpreter go, but people are certainly welcome to stay on as long as you like.
Okay, to add to what she's saying, suicide now in America is the 10th leading cause of death. And our society and our systemic problems are catching up to our society. Maybe the disabled can piggyback onto something that they would have to address because of the normalcy that suicide is taking, being the 10th leading cause of death. At some point, they're going to have to make it an issue. And just wondering if the disabled networks can jump on to something like that and it be added to and maybe take it up a notch or two so that people can see the urgency that it needs to be done.
Well, let me tell you something that's really frightening. That's not talked about very much. Hidden in those laws, okay, every state that puts forth an assisted suicide bill, it is based on the Oregon bill. What a lot of people don't realize is hidden in that Oregon bill, and therefore any assisted suicide bill, is an expanded definition of what terminal illness is. And so we found that out because a gentleman from Sweden, when they were thinking about, creating an assisted suicide law of their own, they contacted the Oregon Division of Health with some questions. And one of the questions was, if you have a chronic condition that if you lose access to health care, that chronic condition then turns terminal, are you eligible for assisted suicide? And the Oregon Division of Health said yes. Actually, one of the examples they gave was someone with diabetes, which is frightening to me because I have diabetes. But you, if you, for example, are on insulin, and we've heard here in the news lately how the rationing of insulin is leading to the deaths of a lot of folks with diabetes, and they're losing access to their insulin. Obviously, you don't have 6 months to live if you go without your insulin. Well, someone could say, okay, I've lost access to my insulin. I'm terminal anyway. I don't want to live like this. And they are eligible to apply for assisted suicide. So if you lose, look at how the insurance companies are behaving. All you have to do is lose access to your treatment, and you're then in danger of assisted suicide. One of the things I was, talking about earlier is the criminalization of pain. I've written on that. And if you don't have access to your pain medications and you live in a state, that you can apply for the assisted suicide. So what's happening now is you don't even have to be terminal. Just lose access, just have a chronic condition that, would be terminal, that you would die if you lost access to health. Just have one of those conditions, lose access to your health care. And if you live in a state where assisted suicide is legal, you are then, you're open to it. You're eligible for it. And that puts you at risk, a lot of risk, of being counseled or convinced, coerced to take the pills, to apply for that because you don't want to be a financial burden to your family. And that's absolutely scary. And that's where the racial disparities really come in to play, because we know that Black and brown folks have less access to health care, to insurance, and if you're disabled, even more likely that a doctor is going to decide that your life has no worth, that you have no quality of life. So that's one of the reasons that I've been trying to reach out, especially to the Black and Latinx community, to say this is what's happening to us. This is where we're going, and we have to fight this. Is there a lot of bandwidth for it? I don't know. We are living look at what we're living at, you know, with racial injustice gone rampant. And so a lot of times, you know, it's like, I don't, you know, they're like, well, why should we care about this when, you know, we risk dying at the hands of police or folks, you know, just walking out our house. But because of the racial disparities in healthcare and the natural suspicion that communities of color have, you know, toward the medical establishment, you know, another reason, you know, to become involved in this. And I invite folks, anyone, people with disabilities, certainly members, you know, of the Black and Latinx and Indigenous, Asian, you know, communities to join us in this, because it's a deadly situation for us if we're not careful. And I do, I will give trainings and the like, you know, on that. And you can reach me at acameron@notdeadyet.org or anitacameron007@gmail.com if we want to, and let's get together, because assisted suicide laws are an attack on us as disabled people, particularly if we are from marginalized communities. So thanks.
Last week, I had a interesting thing happen to me in that I was looking at my medical chart and it labeled me as debilitated. And I asked the doctor, I said, what does that mean? He says, well, that you have a really poor quality of life. And I said, I want that word removed and put disabled in there, because disabled is more accurate. Debilitated is not what I want in my chart. And he said, well, he says, that's standard procedure to call someone with what kind of medical issues you have, to call you debilitated. And I said, well, it might be standard, but that's not what I want in my chart. So take it out. So I was back at the doctor today and I asked, could I look at the chart? And it was gone. So some of it may be that we've got to find out how we're being labeled, because if that had remained there and something happened to me and they're looking at trying to make a decision and it's in my chart that I'm considered a debilitated person versus disabled, then I think that's going to be, you know, one more reason to encourage me to think about suicide.
Well, thanks. And the thing we have to realize too is when we're advocating for ourselves as people with disabilities, I have found in my own experience, race plays a part, and you're more likely to be listened to if you are white. You are not as likely to be listened to if you're Black, as I found in my own personal experience and the personal experiences of every Black person, you know, that I have, you know, that's in my circles, or Black folks and Latinx folks from around the country, especially if you're disabled. So, you know, while that's very, very important, just remember, you know, that, yeah, that may not necessarily, that'll be less likely to happen, you know, if you are someone of color. And that is also one of the reasons why we fear and distrust, you know, the medical system, because you talk about access to your records. Yeah, right. Let me try that being Black, to even get access to my records. And I've tried this in the past, even though supposedly we have the right to them, they don't want to show you those things, you know. So certainly what Susan is saying, you know, is very true. And looking at, you know, finding out how they see you, you know, and you making that effort to change that. Just understand that if you're someone of color, that's less likely, you know, that's less likely to happen. We can try it, but let's not be surprised when we're rebuffed, you know. And so all the more reason to really fight, you know, against this. Thank you.
To piggyback what Anita and Susan are both saying, Anita, you make a lot of good points. And part of the thing that scares me most is that it's not just a pill that someone can take that is assisted suicide in the United States now. Like, someone can very willingly decide to stop nutrition, decide to stop hydration, and they can say that to their doctor, and that is suicide. I mean, the person will waste away, but if their insurance doesn't cover a treatment, and Anita, you were mentioning this, if somebody, you know, if their treatment is not covered anymore and it's a life-saving treatment, they can absolutely say that I want to go off nutrition, I want to go off hydration, I want to go on hospice because my thing is not covered. My life-saving treatment is not covered. And that's assisted suicide in a way, but there is no laws around that. That can happen in any state. It happened to my friend in Philadelphia. We don't have assisted suicide laws, but you can absolutely say that at any given moment. And no one will question it if you're disabled because our quality of life is so poor, right? So when we think about this, and especially with POC people, I mean, how much more at risk we know already that they're going to be, but even more so with this being the state of the United States. I mean, the gentleman who just passed away on hospice is a prime example. They considered his quality of life not good enough to receive COVID treatment. And he didn't get assisted suicide technically, but that's what they did. They took him and put him on hospice because they could do that legally in any state. And that's one of the scariest things. As someone whose partner is Black and disabled and has a lot of Black and disabled friends and is also disabled, we can, all of us, but especially certain communities, are so at risk of something that isn't even in the legal law books right now, but can still happen. And that's just frightening to the nth degree.
Can I say something?
I
Can I say
Go ahead,
something?
Jessica.
Okay. I was trying to say something, but I was muted for a long time. So, in regards to all the conversation, I was trying to set up a petition for the, what is the name of that book that one of you was talking about? Oh, Me Before You. I wanted to set up a petition saying that this book should not be able to be made anymore because the parents, because I think a lot of people believe that, and that's just a bad thing. And I'm so glad I read the book before I went to see the movie, because I read the book and I was like, I don't want to go to the movie. Like, is there a way we can rally as disabled folks to say, look, this is not a good representation of the book of our lives. Here's another one instead. I would discuss, and I was so upset with myself for buying the book because I did not like it that much. That's how badly and I was having nightmares after that. I was like, no. So I just was wondering if you guys had any feedback for me.
Well, I think film can have a tremendous impact on people. It speaks straight to your soul. And I think when you go to films like that, you need to reach out to somebody who understands it the same way you understood it and talk it through and ask for support. And it's okay when films touch you in ways that really cause you pain. And it's important to recognize that pain and to tell others how painful it was for you. Because I mean, I could remember when $1 Million Baby was a film that was out, and I had to watch it a few times because I was going to protest it, and I felt it was important that I see it. Because people would ask, you know, I've discovered from protesting movies in the past that people will say, well, what is it about it? So you can't sort of just object to it on the basis of what you think is in it. You have to actually have watched it and know what it is. And so I found that I had to sort of desensitize myself to the movie, because I started to talk about it and I would just start to cry. And so I had to sort of get to the point where I could talk about it and stand up for it and say, well, this is what happened in the movie, and this is why that piece upset me so much, and why if I was in this situation, that's not what I would want to be happening. And I think it's easier to talk about that when you're talking about somebody else versus saying, you know, this is, you know, this happened to me. Well, this happened in the movie, and talk about it. It gives you a little distance to talk about what's happening in the movie.
Yeah, I was glad that I read the book because I did not go see the movie. But then my non-disabled friends, not knowing what it was about, and just seeing a guy in a wheelchair, they assumed that I would want to go to the movie. I'm like, then I don't surround myself with those kinds of people anymore. But like every time they would see somebody in a wheelchair or some kind of disability, they would automatically assume that I would just love the movie. So it's just like, it's weird. And then they don't even portray people who have disabilities half the time, which really aggravates me. But my friend who's an actor, she doesn't get a lot of games, and they found someone else who is not disabled but a better actor, and that just really irritates me. So yeah, I'm glad I had the chance to speak because I was feeling these feelings as they came up. So thank you.
I'm glad you got to speak too.
Yeah. Thank you for the feedback. Okay.
Anybody else have some comments?
There is a question that we didn't answer yet that was in the chat.
Yeah, I made a comment, but yeah, you should actually answer that. In terms of
The RTL question.
there's another question.
Right to life. So what's the one that you're talking about?
The one I was talking about goes back to the people who are pro-choice. I mean pro-life. That whole
Right, same thing.
Yeah.
Right, that is the question I'm talking about. RTL. Right to life.
I know they were involved with the Peter Singer protest, but I don't know if they've been involved in any other way.
Well, here's the thing, and this mainly comes up in the context of assisted suicide. The pro-assisted suicide groups want to say that this whole issue is about compassionate progressives who want assisted suicide versus the religious and pro-life right who do not. And so that's their framing, and pretty much the media accepts that as the way it is, which has meant that, you know, for the early years, we did our very best to encourage anybody that we encountered to make sure that if they're going to speak out on this issue, that they leave off anything about their connections with Right to Life organizations and simply speak to their concerns about the issue from a secular perspective. But in more recent years, there's been a group called the Patients' Rights Action Fund, which developed to work on the assisted suicide issue and to organize the very disparate and diverse groups that oppose these assisted suicide laws. And they basically say, okay, let's share information so that we all know what legislators are doing, and et cetera, and then leave our other issues at the door, so to speak, when we go into, say, a conference call. And this group, Patients' Rights Action Fund, has done a very good job bringing us together without causing any problems, and there's been a great benefit to it that I think was essential in preventing the passage of roughly 15 bills per year ever since 2014. That's basically what we've been facing, far beyond our capacity. So in that sense, we are definitely sharing information and making sure that we can each play our part in the overall effort to stop these bills. And there are state coalitions that involve all of those segments of the opposition together. And if you want to find the one in your state, actually you could go to Patients' Rights Action Fund online and hook up through them.
Well, I don't want to keep you guys, so if you want to peel off, I understand. And if others want to stay and chat, that's okay too.